Hungary's soon-to-be former Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his associates are actively moving money out of the country and preparing an escape plan. In addition, the oligarchs who support Viktor Orban are moving tens of billions of euros to the United Arab Emirates, the United States, Uruguay, and other distant countries, and are urgently selling their property in Hungary. And all of them are preparing to flee the country in the near future. Today, the future Prime Minister of Hungary, Peter Magyar, made such a sensational statement. His party won a landslide victory over Viktor Orban's party in the elections. At the same time, Magyar is heading to Brussels for urgent talks with the European Commission representative Ursula von der Leyen, seeking to unfreeze billions and billions of euros from the European Union funds for Hungary. Nurse. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. In addition, subscribe to my Telegram channel Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video, where we post breaking news as it comes in. So, the oligarchs who support the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, are moving tens of billions to the United States, the United Arab Emirates, the United States of America, Uruguay, and other distant countries. Peter Magyar, whose party TISA won the parliamentary elections, believes that the so-called businessmen who have always fed off Orban's patronage are simply preparing to flee the country. According to Magyar, the Hungarian National Tax and Customs Administration has suspended several transfers belonging to the Allies' inner circle, the ally of Viktor Orban, Antal, Rogán. He also added that, as he put it, Orban's mobsters are trying to sell their assets. Here is a quote from Peter Magyar. I have repeatedly called on the Prosecutor General, the Captain of the National Police, and the Head of the National Tax and Customs Administration of Hungary to detain criminals who are taking thousands of billions of forints from the Hungarian people so they cannot escape to other countries, before the formation of the TISA government. The future Prime Minister of Hungary called on domestic and foreign investors not to buy assets from the Orban mafia under any circumstances, because then they may face the National Office for Asset Recovery and Protection. In other words, he warned that you can of course buy them, but later if it is proven that these assets were obtained through corruption, then by law this property will simply be taken away from you. Magyar also said that several families of oligarchs close to Orban have already left Hungary. According to him, quote, several influential oligarch families have taken their children out of school and are arranging reliable security guards for their departure. And since Magyar specifically mentioned Antal Rogán as an example of someone who is now trying to flee the country, since he was close to Viktor Orban, I'll tell you a bit more about him, because he is a perfect example of corruption in Viktor Orban's inner circle. Antal Rogán is one of the most influential Hungarian politicians, the head of the office of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, overseeing intelligence and media strategy. He is a key ally of Orban, keeping the system of rule running. But in January 2025, he suddenly came under sanctions from the United States of America for corruption. Yes, already under Donald Trump, who actively supported Orban himself. But in fact, later in April 2025, Donald Trump's administration decided to lift the sanctions from Antal Rogán. Mysteriously, they just lifted them without explanation. Rogán leads Hungary's cabinet of ministers, making him Orban's right-hand man and the nation's second most influential figure. He also oversees Hungary's civilian intelligence services. He is also considered the architect of the Fidesz party's media strategy, controlling the coverage of the government's activities in the media. And the fact that Magyar has taken on this person already indicates that Magyar is truly determined to fight against Orban's old system. Orban himself also seems to be preparing the ground for an escape. The outgoing Prime Minister of Hungary, after his Fidesz party's crushing defeat in the elections, announced that he is giving up his parliamentary mandate. Here's a quote from Orban. Right now, I am needed not in parliament, but in reorganizing the patriotic movement. The mandate I received as the first candidate on the Fidesz list is essentially a parliamentary mandate for Fidesz, so I have decided to give it up. And this was Viktor Orban's most important statement, because it's important to note here that Viktor Orban has led the Fidesz party since 1990 and has been elected to parliament in one way or another ever since. In 2010, he became the head of the government for the second time, but after 16 years, most of the Fidesz party's voters apparently became disappointed in Orban and his party. Fellow citizens accuse Orban and his inner circle of corruption and lowering Hungary's standard of living. Although Orban, let me remind you, claimed that he buys cheap gas and cheap oil from Russia, and that Hungarians don't even feel the burden of utility bills. Turns out they don't actually pay pennies for utilities. That's why Orban decided, as they say, to step away from everything, leave parliament, and even hand over the party leader position to his fellow party member. In other words, he left Fidesz altogether. That's why I wouldn't be surprised if Orban suddenly, in quotes, shows up somewhere abroad and, announces the continuation of his brave struggle. Well, like that former president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, when he fled to Russia, for some time he was still saying something from there, claiming he was continuing his activities as the supposedly legitimate president. Moreover, it was previously reported that the new Hungarian government would review the national plans submitted by Orban's officials to obtain cheap European funding for rearmament. Umadayara expresses concerns about the corruption risks in this plan. Once again, Viktor Orban, a Eurosceptic who was always spitting at Brussels, took money from that very Brussels, and in huge amounts. You will be surprised by the sums. It is noted that revising the goals and scope of the plan in accordance with the priorities of the Hungarian government is quite possible. And the European Commission agreed to review this plan before taking further action. And the loan scheme called SAFE was launched last year in Brussels to strengthen the defense industry and the European Union's readiness for the Russian threat. This SAFE initiative will distribute 150 billion euros among 19 member states of the European Union. And where will part of this money go? To Hungary. So, Orban didn't really like Brussels that much, but from Brussels he says, oh listen, you have some new program there and give me a little bit of money too. But Magyar has now stated that he wants to review the list of enterprises and make a decision based on real needs and an assessment of corruption risks. And those very corruption risks are connected to the industrial interests of Viktor Orban's government, which is now stepping down. And now, attention. Hungary's financial package of 16 billion euros was one of the largest in the European Union under the SAFE program. This package was second only to Poland and Romania and exceeded the allocation for France, which requested 15 billion euros from the EU for its rearmament. Well, as you can imagine, there was definitely something to steal there. And it's obvious that Orban's circle wanted to profit from this funding because everything would go to their own production facilities. And now it has become known that the incoming Prime Minister of Hungary, Peter Magyar, will go to Brussels this Wednesday for urgent talks with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, seeking to unfreeze additional billions of euros from European Union funds. As you know, this Thursday, Brussels finally officially approved a loan of 90 billion euros for Ukraine, after Budapest, which had long resisted under Orban, dropped its objections, thus removing a key political obstacle for the Hungarian government in its efforts to restore ties with the European Union. As a result, Brussels stated that they are ready to hold talks with Magyar as soon as possible so that Hungary does not lose funding from the European Union, because there are certain risks. The fact is that Hungary is currently at risk of losing about 10 billion euros from the post-COVID-19 recovery funds if it does not meet the August deadline. Certain reforms must be done there before August to get the money, as the recovery fund is winding down and nearing closure. Plus, about 18 billion euros remain frozen due to the retreat from democratic principles under Orban. Just add it up. 16 billion there, 10 billion there, 18 billion there. Hungary is also seeking access to additional European Union funding in the defense sector and exemption from daily fines imposed over migration disputes. So Magyar has a lot of work to do. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details in the description of this video or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I would appreciate any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.